Moscow declares it is ready to enter peace talks with Kyiv without preconditions as Donald Trump questions Vladimir Putin's willingness to end the war. Will the US put more pressure on Russia, and has Kyiv finally found a common tongue with Washington? To discuss it all, we're joined by Mark Toth, a national security and foreign policy analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Machi. Good to see you again.
You too. So only one day after Donald Trump stated that Ukraine and Russia are very close to a peace deal, he has changed his mind and now suspects that Putin is simply somehow trying to manipulate him. So, well, it's not the first time that we are observing a sudden change at the White House, but is this one for good? And what is the status, the current status of negotiations?
Machi, it's a great question because I think we're still amidst what I call kabuki theater here. There's a lot of messaging going on. The media has parsed a lot of Trump's statement. They seem to underemphasize the first part of it, which was saying, look, Ukraine's not going to get back Crimea. Ukraine's not going to get back certain territories, or it implies that certain territories that Russia now controls in parts of Kherson, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. And those are non-starters in terms of sovereignty, ultimate sovereignty, somehow being ceded to the Russians. Zelensky's made that clear. He's not willing to do that. Then on the flip side of that message, though, he was, as you were just pointing out, Trump was saying that he suspects that Putin may be tapping him out. So I think there's messaging to both Zelensky and to Putin to get a deal. And then subsequent to that, we've seen comments coming yet again from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the U.S. believes that next week is a critical week. We've heard this before. Or that the U.S. is not going to continue these discussions. It's a waste of time. So at this point, I still think we're seeing a lot of theater, a lot of messaging. And we just, had a curveball thrown yet just a few minutes before I came on air here with you, where Lavrov is now claiming that Russia would agree to a ceasefire if Ukraine does two things. One, doesn't accept any more armament deliveries from the West, and two, doesn't use any kind of truce, any ceasefire to reposition or re-strengthen its forces. Basically, they're asking for a capitulation. So lots of messaging, not sure exactly yet what the substance is.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the question of Crimea. Can Kyiv and Washington somehow bypass it in order to let President Zelenskyy, not to lose his face in front of his compatriots?
I think there's two sides to that question, Machi. There's what Zelenskyy can afford to do from a country standpoint. Clearly, he's not constitutionally allowed, without the Rada declaring it, to cede any kind of territory. He's willing, and he says this obliquely, but he says that he's willing to talk about what, in effect, would be temporary occupation of certain Ukrainian territories by Russia as part of any kind of peace process. But he wants a ceasefire first. And then you certainly have the European side of this angle, though. In my view, and General Ben Hodges has been on your program many times, his view, we view as military analysts Crimea as being the decisive terrain of this conflict, and ultimately the decisive terrain of a conflict in the future, in terms of its control over the Black Sea, in terms of it creating a land bridge if it were to be frozen, as it is now, for Russia at some point, like they've already done once, resume this war to go after Odessa and elsewhere, that it could put Eastern Europe at threat. So from my standpoint, while yes, there's some diplomatic doublespeak that could be used to pave over that, I think the consequences to both Ukraine and to both Europe are significant, and that we shouldn't take this lightly. Now, Trump wants to get there. He's made it very clear in his statement in a Time Inc. interview that it's crazy to think that Ukraine would get Crimea back, that basically it's de facto Russian now. I don't think either Ukraine nor Europe should accept that, and especially your country, Poland. Ultimately, that would be strategically very dangerous for you to do that. And Poland should be saying, no, look, Ukraine should not be put in this position where they have to cede any of its territory on a permanent basis.
Right. Now, do you believe that a true miracle happened and something has indeed changed in Rome in relations between President Zelenskyy and Trump?
I'd like to believe, as a devout Christian myself, I'd like to believe that that kind of a miracle happens. However, again, I think it's a question of optics. It's staging. It's a presidential moment. It's good for photographs. It's good for media analysts like me to speculate about. But what I really want to see is the nuts and bolts on the ground. Until I see Trump actually implementing sanctions, if Russia doesn't get to the table sooner as opposed to later and accepts a complete ceasefire, which is what Trump initially done, I'm going to be hesitant to believe it. Right now, what we're seeing is the U.S. is still stalling on some intel sharing. They're still not approving new packages of military aids and weapons. Europe, in turn, is being forced to step up and do that in lieu of. And Russia continues to attack Ukrainian civilians intentionally. We just see the creepy repeated over and over again, be it in Sumy and Kyiv. I wouldn't be shocked if we see it in Lviv again. All of these things are just indicative that while the optics are there and it's hopeful that there's some kind of miracle that can be had, unfortunately, the things that are happening on the ground, the reality of the ground, is that we're still in this. And I'd add really quickly here, I think even this point that Lavrov made, I'd beware of that. Beware of a Russian Trojan horse here, because every indication still is that Russia is preparing for an offensive either in the summer or in the fall now of 2025. And it looks like we're detecting changes on the battlefield, wider usage of motorcycles, et cetera, to defeat drones, that the Russians are looking for different ways of advancing in a drone environment type warfare. So I see the optics of it. You're right to point it out. The media is right to notice it. But unfortunately, when you get down to the detail and you look at the grassroots level, I don't see anything substantively changing yet.
And lastly, briefly, Donald Trump has mentioned sanctions on Russia. Now, what measures can he, in fact, introduce that would be any different from what Joe Biden has already done for Ukraine and, well, for them to have a bigger impact on the current situation?
Right. If he were to go there, he certainly could choke off the rest of Russia's ability to do transnational transactions. That would be one way. He certainly could go after the shadow fleet that is funding most of Russia's war at this point in terms of transporting oil around the world. But sanctions in and of itself are not going to be enough. In my opinion, that's just going to be more cosmetic. China would make up for that. I think for Trump, if he's going to have any significant action to be able to move Putin off of where he's at, it's going to take a kinetic punch to the face of Russia. And that's going to mean upping the weapons supply, munitions supply, taking the handcuffs off of Ukraine to actually go and interdict in the deep fight so that they can start winning these close fights. It's going to have to be kinetic, in my view, unfortunately, tragically for the people involved. But I don't think sanctions will be enough.
Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy analyst, was our guest tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Machi, and happy 1,000 years to you and your country persons.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and features here on TVP World.